Hi there, Nigel Saunders here. I've had a really fun week of designing and making bonsai pots. But not these pots. I'll show you the ones I made. Before I show you the pots, there's a little bit of a story behind them, and that's coming up in the Bonsai Zone. Today's story begins with a couple of photographs from a book that was published back in 1989. This book is called Chinese Bonsai, The Art of Penjing. I don't know if this book is still available today. Inside the book, there's some trees that are in some really nice pots. They're marble pots, and they're all handmade. Here's another couple of pots, an oval one, and a really shallow oval tray pot. It wasn't just the pots in this book that caught my eye. There's a couple of photographs that I really like. There's this photograph of a window ledge bonsai garden, and I really like the look of this. And I was thinking for little tiny bonsai trees, it would be nice to make a display like this someday. Little miniature trees in little miniature pots. There's a photograph I like even better. It's a set of bonsai benches with bonsai trees on it. And I thought that would make a really nice Mame bonsai display, or a display of little miniature bonsai trees. To set up a miniature bench like this and have a white background. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind for a long time. The problem I had is that all my small bonsai pots didn't look like miniature versions of a large bonsai pot. All the small bonsai pots I have all had clumsy looking feet on them. They were tall. They didn't look like miniature versions of a larger bonsai pot. I couldn't buy the kind of bonsai pots I wanted, little miniature pots. So I realized, well, I'm going to have to make my own. For the fine miniature details I wanted in my pots, I wasn't sure if clay would work, so I started exploring other ideas. To make my miniature bonsai pots, I entered the world of 3D printing.
Hey guys, I'm Steph from the Stratford Public Library Makerspace, and we're going to do some 3D printing. So what the 3D printer is doing right now is it's auto leveling. The nozzle will touch down on 3 spots just to double check that it's all level. First, a little bit of filament's going to come out. We decided to go on black for this one, and then it's going to go through the auto leveling process, which just takes a few minutes. It's starting.
3D printing allowed me to design and make my own pots and get all the fine details I was looking for. These are my first bonsai pots straight off the 3D printer. I made a rectangular one and an oval one. I printed the feet separately, so I'll have to separate those and glue them to the bottom of the pot. The finish is a little rough on the pots. It's almost like carbon fiber. So I may smooth out some of them, and some I'm going to leave just as is. This is the largest pot I've made so far, and it took about 5.5 hours to print this pot. Once I have these pots modeled in 3D on the computer, I can then scale them down to make almost any miniature size I want. The next ones I'm working on will be white to look like marble. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be exploring all kinds of different pot designs and ideas. I'm even going to 3D print some stands to go underneath the pots. Today I'm going to be finishing this pot. I'm going to be gluing the feet on, finishing the outside, and getting a tree planted. The plastic that these pots are printed from is really tough. It's like almost unbreakable. You can bend it in half and it still doesn't break. Really tough stuff. So we need to glue this with crazy glue, or something like crazy glue. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these feet. I just had them attached with like a little bit of sprue. There we go, that's one. So they'll get glued to the bottom here. Just like that. Should look pretty good. I have the 4 feet separated now, and I'm going to clean up the sprue marks. So just clean them up a bit, like that. And the marks on the pot also. I made the feet separate so this could sit flat on the bed when it's being printed. So if you imagine this is the bed, It prints this surface flat. If I had the feed molded into this part, it would have to create a grid structure underneath to support the flat bottom of the pot. So it makes it easier for printing to have the pot flat on the bed and have the feed off to the side so I can attach them later on. Before I glue the feed on, I'm just going to rough the surfaces up with a bit of sandpaper to make a better glue joint. I've got some 800 grit sandpaper here. I'm just going to rub the bottom of the pot. That looks good. And then I'll do each foot. Just to scuff them up slightly on the bottom surface. I have everything ready for gluing now, so I'm just going to place the feet on the bottom of the pot, make sure they fit and I have them in the right orientation. That looks pretty good there. I've never 3D printed in my life before, and I've never used crazy glue before, so there's a lot of firsts in this video. I'm using a gel type super glue. I've read that this works really well on this type of plastic. So let's go. Let's hope I don't glue my fingers together or anything. Let's open it up. Okay, here I go. I shook the bottle nicely, removing the cap, shaking the glue into the cap here, and we're supposed to just put a drop. And here goes the foot onto the I'm going to position it carefully, press down, and hold. I think that's working quite well. Looks good. There's a look at the miniature feet. They're kind of a two-step design. I think they look pretty good. Next for this pot, to get it to look really miniature, I'm going to do some finishing work on it to make it look like it's a fine clay pot. I'll start by scraping all the edges, scraping off the excess glue. Next I'll go back with the sandpaper and finish all the surfaces that show on the pot. So the outsides, the bottom, everything that you can see to make it nice and smooth. I've spent about half an hour on the pot, filing it and sanding it, trying to get it smooth, and it's easy on some surfaces, but not very easy on the side with all the detail. So I think the pot will be what it is. It's a plastic 3D printed pot. I think for this pot, I'm just going to use black paint to kind of hide the glue marks. They're a little more whitish, the glue marks, so I'm just going to paint over some black paint, and I'll just leave it black. Yeah, so it just takes the whiteness off the glue. The black paint worked really well, giving me a nice, even, consistent finish. I've placed a Buddhist monk behind my pot to kind of give you an idea of the scale look I'm looking for in the pot. So it looks like it's a large tray-type pot that you would plant a forest in or something like that. It's time to start planting. I was looking around for suitable trees, ones with little small leaves. I would have ideally liked one of the tropical Chinese elms. They have really nice tiny leaves, but I don't have any. I'll have to ask Kong in our club to get some cuttings. So the best thing I have is sarissas, and I'm going to plant them as a forest planting. I have a little rock that kind of looks like a mountain or a hill that I'm going to try using in the landscape, and then I'll plant these trees and maybe cuttings off them to make a forest. I'll start by cutting a screen to place in the bottom of the pot to cover up the drainage holes, and I'll just put one large screen. Makes it easier to get out of the pot. After a little trimming, the screen fits nicely in the bottom of the pot. I'm going to use regular bonsai soil in the bottom of the pot, and then I'll top dress it with a layer of fine sand. It won't take much soil to fill this pot, so I'll just put a layer in the bottom. And this soil is just half perlite and half turfus. And I sift it to remove all the dust and the fine particles. So my final particle size is about 3 to 4 millimeters, or 1/8 of an inch. This pot actually took more soil than I expected it to. These shallow pots do that. That looks about good. I'm going to just settle the soil in with my spoon. I'm going to place my rock now. And this is the front of the rock. I'll just get some of this moss off. And I'm looking at the front of the planting here and just trying to decide where to put it. There's a shot of the planting with the rock in place, and I'm just standing back looking at it. I think I need to move the rock over a little bit. I think that looks better. It looks a little more balanced in the pot. My next task is to get the sarissas out of the pot. Some of these are fairly new cuttings in here, and some are quite established, so I'm going to try and get them out. Oh, they're really stuck in there. I'm going to have to come in with the spatula and there we go. They filled the pot, which is also good. So let's get them combed out and we'll prune them up and get them planted. I think I'll do this over a tray. I'll make less of a mess. So I'm just going to gently comb out the roots and then try and get them pruned into a nice radial pattern so they radiate out from the trunk. I was even thinking of 3D printing a bonsai tool like this. So I might do that in future. It'll be plastic, but still do the job. So I'm going to separate the two trees. Try to. Wow, they're really fused in here. I don't even think they've been in this pot very long. Like maybe a year at the most. And with the sarissa, they're always tangled. They never go as planned. You always have to do a lot of root work to get the roots even close to looking good. So that one's pretty well cleaned out now. We'll do this little one now. I've got a root that's a little high here. I'm going to prune this one off. And there's another one on this side that I'm going to prune off. It's getting there. You don't have to worry about removing a lot of root on sarissas because they grow really easily from cuttings. So when the conditions are right, you can pretty well do anything to them and they'll keep growing. These trees are in a humid environment here in the greenhouse, so they'll continue growing with no problems. If you prune the roots this severe and put them in a pot in a normal dry environment, the tree would probably die. So they need to be kept humid. You can put a bag around the tree to keep the humidity in while the tree's recovering, but a greenhouse or sunroom is ideal. So I'm going to start pruning back the tree now. So I'm going to take it to some of the first nodes here, just making it more compact. There's a big long branch over here that I'm going to cut back. Hopefully I can with these scissors. There we go. And here, here. And we're going to cut this one back to here. That makes a little more of a compact tree. I may even prune it right back. I think I will. I'm going to get the other cutters out. I think we want to keep these trees fairly small, so I think I'm going to go right back to here. There. That gives a nice thick trunk and a little miniature tree. I'm going to save all the cuttings that I'm clipping off, and I may put them in the forest to increase the density of trees. I'll continue pruning up all the rest of the cuttings, pruning them back to make little trees. Here's my 3 trees that have roots, and the rest will be cuttings in the pot. So I'm going to arrange the 3 trees in the pot first. I think I'll arrange them something like this, with the biggest tree out front, the second largest tree off to the side, and the smallest in the back. I'll get the trees planted in the soil, and we'll come back and see how the arrangement looks. I've got the trees arranged in the pot now, so you can see them in front of our monk, how they look. I still have to do the landscaping, but it's getting really dark. I don't want to get out the lights tonight, so I'll finish this tomorrow. We'll get some good shots. We'll finish the landscaping, add some moss, and try and make it look really good. Hi everyone, we're back for day 2 of planting our miniature bonsai forest. My first task will be to get these roots arranged just a little better. And I'll put just a little bit more soil around them. Just put a little bit more soil around the roots. So we don't want those drying out, we want them to grow nicely. That looks a little better. As a next step, I'm going to sit down in front of the planting, and I've got to try and imagine what the trees will look like with more branches and more foliage. So kind of imagine the future of this forest. And then if I have to rearrange the trees or add more cuttings, I'll do so. I had a good look at the forest. I studied it for a while, and I think everything's okay in it. We'll get some trees filling in back here, and these will just grow, get little canopies, and I think it'll look pretty good in the future. So the next step, I'm going to put a layer of sand down on top of my bonsai soil. There's a few reasons why I put sand down. One is it covers up the soil, so you don't see the coarse, out of scale perlite and turfus. Another reason, it gives a nice layer on top of the soil that holds moisture. So the surface roots are kind of in a nice zone where they stay moist, but they get lots of oxygen from the coarse soil down below. The sand also helps stop surface evaporation. This coarse type bonsai soil has a lot of air spaces in it, and when it's windy out, it dries out very quickly. So the layer of sand on top kind of helps hold the moisture in the soil and kind of conserves your water. Another reason is that moss really grows well on top of this sand. So the little patches of moss I have here, they'll spread really easily across the sand surface. I've got the sand applied, and now I'm just going to give it a light misting to kind of settle it in around the soil so it fills all the cracks on the surface soil. I'll have to go in and pick out these large pieces of perlite. They don't look very good. And, put some more sand down in areas where it's a little thin, and generally fix up the landscape. In the end, you don't want to see any large chunks of bonsai soil at all. A miniature landscape like this can take a lot of care. Because everything's a small scale, things can quickly get out of hand. Trees can get a shoot that grows way up and it looks way out of scale. Your moss can grow really thick quickly. So these little ones, if you're the kind of person who likes taking care of a little landscape, you'll have a lot of fun with it, keeping your trees pruned and your moss pruned and everything looking good. It's not the kind of landscape you could just let grow for the whole summer. It would quickly get out of hand and would just look like a big blob of moss. I've got the sand layer all applied and the surface cleaned up, so the next step will be to apply some moss. I don't want this sandy type look to this planting. I want it to be nice and lush looking. So I'm going to find some fine moss to plant around on top of the soil. I'm going to apply the moss with just little clumps at a time. and just press it down into the sand. Some of the clumps of moss I have is quite long, so I would just apply that sparingly, sort of to look like bushes. Just kind of place it here and there. And this moss will spread. If you're patient, it'll spread over the surface of the sand in a few weeks. And as you apply the moss, you can mist it too. It goes on a little easier when it's wet. It'll conform to the surface irregularities a little better. Looking a little more green now. I've got the moss applied to the surface now. I'm going to leave a little bit of a path through here. And you can see the moss is pretty ragged looking. So it needs a good trimming all around the edges and a trimming to keep it short so it looks more miniature. So I'm going to do that now. So I'll just come in here, trim anything that's overhanging the edges like that. You always want the edges of your pot nice and clean. So I'll keep working away at the moss. And see how it all looks. Growing bonsai on a small scale like this is just as much fun as growing a great big tree. I finished the work on the planting for today. Is it done? No, it's just started. I'm very excited about 3D printing. My next project is I'm going to print a stand for underneath this pot. I'll be expanding this scene with the Buddhist monk and my little landscape in future, and maybe put it in a show someday. That's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.